Hi, and welcome to Bear Clear and Not Misleading, the podcast where we talk about, God knows, frankly, financial promotions and culture in financial services and a bit of business and whatever we've sort of had for breakfast that morning. So, good morning, Wayne.
Good morning, Gareth.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I didn't. I don't eat at breakfast, Gareth. I'm an intermittent faster, I'm afraid. Of 5 years, just to prove that this isn't a fad. This is a long-term plan for me.
Someone said to me the other day that if you intermittently fast every day, that's not intermittent fasting, that's just regular, good old fasting.
Yes, in the olden days, I used to call it skipping breakfast to
Yeah.
save money so I could spend it on other things. But no, it's intermittent fasting now because that's what someone on Instagram said.
Okay, good. I like it. So now that you're hungry and ready to tackle the world, what have we got in store today?
What have we got? A little bit of update on the funds on OFR. What's a financial promotion? What isn't? What does undue cost look like? So we're probably a few months, I think, into talking with clients and the regulator about what all this stuff means. So probably a little bit of clarity on that now for people that aren't quite through the landing slots yet. And then crypto world. I think you got a couple of points on that.
Yeah. What were they? I've forgotten already, Wayne. Yeah, we were going to talk about. Yeah, I have actually forgotten when. That's a good scope of
Bitcoin
my podcast. Oh yeah,
ATMs
Bitcoin
as well.
ATMs. You've got it.
Yeah.
You've nailed it. Thank you. That's why sitting at a desk has helped. Yeah, Bitcoin ATMs and some enforcement actions and what that means for the regulators position nowadays on crypto and financial promotions and all things regulation. So, okay, then without further ado, let's cover off some fun specific points. We are back in OFR world, OFR being the overseas funds regime. And as a recap, if you've been under a rock, that is for any fund that is in the EEA, that is a UCITS, that wants to promote into the UK, you need to apply for registration, depending on what letter of the alphabet your Manco's name sits in. So, we are now at letter, what are we at, Wayne? C. So we've had A's and B's come through now, and things seem to be rolling. And one of the top questions that has come up is a fund's prospectus a financial promotion? Over to you, Wayne.
So the short answer is yes, it is. The longer answer is that seems odd, and to some extent, you can understand that it would seem odd given the very technical legal nature of a prospectus and the supplements, of course. But I think when we sort of delve into why that might be the case, it makes a little bit more sense and doesn't create a huge amount of extra work, really. But the prospectus for offshore funds going through OFR is like the document that is going to be created for everything for people to be pointed to, because that's where all the detail is. And what I feel the FCA is trying to avoid in particular is firstly, obviously, just ignoring what legislation says, and there is no carve out of it in this circumstance. And so, on a technical point, it is included. But secondly, is to avoid an unfair or unlevel playing field between offshore funds through OFR and UK funds in the UK. And a communication that's given to investors in the UK, which is a prospectus, has very specific requirements in COL that says what has to be included and what that prospectus has to do and can't do. But of course, there are no rules like that for offshore funds because they're not under COL. So, given completely free reign to say and do whatever they want in a document, you could conceivably have someone producing a prospectus with all the usual stuff in it and then a whole load of cherry-picked performance data, lots of bold claims, hyperbole, all kinds of stuff that just wouldn't look great if it were checked by someone in the UK that is authorized. And so that makes a little bit more sense to me. So we have that in hand now for a couple of clients who are going through that process. We know there are people who've made their application who were very early on, sort of the A's mostly, A's and B's, who went in without this clarity, and their application has been sort of interrogated a little bit on that point, amongst others, and so they've had to react to that and get their house in order to find an approver for that document.
I'm going to refer to my notes because it's unusual for me to sit here with my phone on one of these podcasts, but I think actually in this context it's quite important. And the FA sort of have very wiggle room in this matter because of the way the rules are actually drafted around prospectuses. And specifically call 4.2 has some wording around, what a prospectus contains. And it is, and I'm just going to read it out. Information which investors and their professional advisors would reasonably require and reasonably expect to find in the prospectus for the purpose of making an informed judgment about, and the key words here are, the merits of investing in the fund. And so you can't really say it's not a promotion if the document isn't intended to tell you what the merits of investing are. It would have to say the merits are this, and that is promotional in nature. That is saying to someone almost by invitation, this is a really good product. Come and use it as part of your financial, planning, as part of your portfolio. And so
that's
they
the
really
point.
have a sort of weird position to be, right? Because they just cannot get away from that language in the rules.
Yeah, and this is a point we make across all the product ranges that we do this financial promotion piece for. Is the words financial promotion sound like marketing? Bright colours, bold claims, etc. Very exciting stuff. That's not what financial promotion is at all. It's much lower bar than that. It's can be far more simple than something that says you should buy this because it's going to go to the moon. So in that context, it does make some sense. And I would have thought UK firms would equally be keen that anyone marketing, selling, promoting, distributing offshore products into the UK would like to see some degree of protection and oversight of what they're doing. That means that it's just not a complete free-for-all that makes it very difficult for them to come up against, to compete with.
Yeah, definitely. And that sort of leads on to one other point, doesn't it? Which is the different types of funds, prospectuses, and whether they're caught. So one other thing we've been thinking about recently is whether ETF UCITS have the same thing where their prospectus needs to be approved. And the short answer is, I think, again, yes. And that's not just me sitting here selfishly saying, great, we get a whole lot of business. But actually, even though the prospectus is kind of a required listing document to be able to list an ETF, it still does that same function of, promoting the merits of the product itself. And so it's, still by definition, a document that has an invitational purpose to, conduct investment activity into that product. And so, yeah, the same output seems to apply on that basis. But the wider then piece is, what are the bits that don't sit in this world? Or conversely, which ones also still do? So we know, for instance, the kid, right? That's very clearly excluded as a financial promotion from the rules. So no question about it. The kid is out of scope. Fact sheet, definitely in.
Yep,
Website.
definitely in. And you can see that what we find is that documents that are super prescribed in what they should contain and what they can't contain and how they're presented are report and accounts, which are not scope, and the kids. What will happen when we get to consumer composite investments, when we sort of start to further diverge away, we don't yet know. We started to look at that, and we're involved in that sort of process of what they might look like. But that's a further divergence that might require a document that falls under the financial promotion rules, or at the very least will be another document that looks a little different in the UK to what it does in Europe. And so it's something else that these offshore funds will have to create and publish. And then to your point there about the web pages, yes, of course, web pages are in scope and they don't have to be super bright and shiny with lots of videos and social media links to be promotional. They just are promotional by their nature. And so what we see are two things. One is firms that we've helped to have web pages already, and helpfully in Europe, The structure of these web pages is very similar, if not the same, to what we see in the UK, where you have a sort of a wall or a, should we say, friction that identifies people, or they self-identify as being retail or professional or institutional, and so they only are presented with information that's appropriate. So the people that do it already, who will need those web pages to be structured and approved properly. On the flip side, there are those who don't have it, who do want to have documents that are approved for retail, and so we're saying to them, you should probably have those same documents available on a web page. It doesn't need to be complex, can be pretty basic, keep it behind those walls, and we can look at those for them too, so that we're not just thinking about the the simple document that exists as a PDF or a single 1 or 2 page or whatever that might be, but it's how that's presented, how it's available to people, what that looks like on a full journey, and so then you can see this, the consumer duty stuff start to come into effect via us as the authorised entity in the UK.
And great segue here, Wayne. Cue this. Consumer duty obviously then covers a number of factors that are relevant to an investor and taking them into account and treating them fairly. And one of those things is making sure that the product that they're buying, in this case, gives them good value. And so there's a sort of additional point here that's come up in our last probably a few weeks of what does value look like, and is the FCA looking at that under an OFR application? And I think we know the answer to that is yes. We have, seen that get challenged potentially by the FCA in some cases. We often get asked, is there a hard number above which a fund, above which the fees of a fund are too high? Do we have an actual answer to that, Wayne?
But the actual answer is no, there isn't, and that makes a lot of sense because nobody, including the FCA, wants the FCA to be a price regulator. If they start setting firm thresholds or even soft thresholds at particular figures, then they start to look like a price regulator or a price setter, and that's not good. So we expect that they will look at the overall cost of the fund, of course, which you can't ignore that, and how that might compare with peer groups, UK and offshore peer groups. So where are you versus others? That will be a thing. The big piece, though, is from an OFR application perspective, is who's getting paid what and for why. So you don't want to see entities that are doing very little getting paid big portions of the overall fees out of a fund, because that's not very attractive. They're not delivering value, or to use the OFR threshold, it may be considered an undue cost. And that then looks a little bit like the AOV process in the UK. From our perspective, what we look at is that also, what you look like compared to others, who's getting paid what. But also, we're concerned with the fund's ability to deliver on its objective. And so if costs are set at a height where, let's say, a low risk fund that wants to do a cash plus like level of return for very low risk has 3%, 4%, 5% OCF, well, you're unlikely to get low risk cash like returns when you're taking 3, 4, 5% in charges every year. So that's the lens through which we will primarily look at these funds. And you're kind of caught anyway, because you can't distribute really in the UK. We can't without going through a platform or a wealth manager or a DFM or some UK authorized distributor, generally speaking. And they themselves are in scope on the value point under consumer duty cross-cutting rules. So they also need to consider, what does this product cost look like in regard to the full distribution chain of which they are a part, and does that make it unviable, too expensive, not delivering value, whatever term you want to use for that.
And we've seen another 3-letter acronym come up, which is RDR, in the context of OFR. And specifically, these, you mentioned it earlier, like who's getting paid what to do what, and are there still products out there in Europe, not subject to RDR that have been paying commission to distributors or whoever, advisors. And is that commission being paid from the fund? Is it being paid by the Manco? Is that part of the, the, the overall fees and charges that come out of the product that's trying to get sold into the UK? And again, making sure that those share classes that come into the UK are clean of that, or if not, there have been no disturbance event, I suppose, since those payments were starting to be made. Making sure that there's been no disturbance event, but for a fund that's been going for a while, like that would be quite unusual, right? Like you wouldn't expect to see after, I don't know, 10, 15 years, a fund that has no disturbance event that stops those kind of RDR style payments from being made, right?
Yeah, we've seen in the UK that although there was like no real sunset clause on post RDR, pre RDR, sorry, payments, the reality is, I think most, if not all, now UK fund managers are moving people out of bundled share classes into clean share classes, because I don't know how you can justify continuing to pay for something that was advised on in 2012 and 13 years later hasn't been disturbed. It sort of feels a little bit unlikely, doesn't it? So I think the only perhaps exception might be where someone is in a product where there is rebates being paid to somewhere like a platform who are passing that back to the retail investor, which is a little bit different. But for all other cases, it's not. It's highly unlikely. It's been very difficult to justify that, and so this sort of feels like a moment when those European funds need to go through the same review process and a bit of action that the UK funds went through AOV, which is, who are we paying this stuff to? Let's make sure we fully understand that, and what they're being paid it for, and does it actually still need to be paid? Because I can't imagine there are many making those kind of payments to any substantial amount at all. So, why let everything fall over because of something that's just perhaps not been looked at for a while, or doesn't need to continue?
Cool. All right, Wayne, shall we break the cardinal rule of podcasting, which is to mid-episode switch to an entirely different market segment with an entirely different audience?
We can do, but I think we can probably create some links, right? It's going to be a bit difficult, right? But let's try and do it anyway. Let's try and see what can we learn from the completely different world of crypto to funds, and see if there's anything across there that might be helpful. I'll think of it while you start talking.
All right. Well, let's move into crypto, shall we? So, we are sort of BAU now in the FinProm world for crypto in the UK. I would say most people have got their head around it. People may still not be happy about it, but ultimately they are doing what they can to comply. The rules feel familiar now. People are understanding what the requirements are. Good news, mostly. I think you're starting to see some people push the boundaries of those rules now. Like they've got comfortable, they've sat in the regime, and now they're starting to do new things, new advertising channels, new types of content. You're going back to that sort of innovative. We called it innovative right at the start. This didn't we? Like crypto is very fast paced, where it thinks on the edge. It does fun and interesting things, and we're seeing that as well in the context of the promotions that are coming through and what people are saying and how they want to say it, and especially largely where they want to distribute it. One channel in particular seems to be on the up, and that's video for sure. We're seeing a lot of crypto ads going through video platforms, YouTube adverts, TikTok adverts, Instagram Reels, that kind of thing. And one thing that we found interesting, I suppose, but also struggled to model a little bit, is the presentation of those bits of content on those channels. A video, for the most part, is usually, particularly if you're creating it for something like YouTube, is created in a landscape frame. And everything you do to design that bit of video is viewed in that way. And usually if you're designing it, you're sat at a computer, you are in your landscape monitor, and you will put a risk warning if you're doing a FinProm that is designed to be landscape with your kind of call to action underneath that. But there's nuance in video, and we've seen recently, I saw some in the wild the other day, where YouTube just presents videos as adverts whilst you're in kind of portrait mode in your phone. And suddenly that thing that was meant to be viewed this way is suddenly being viewed the other way and is being crammed in at the top of a screen. And any text that's kind of on there, other than like the big bold heading in the middle of the screen, is suddenly really hard to read. And so, is that still prominent? Is there anything you can do about that in the context of prominence? It was, in some of those cases, maybe the tagline or the call to action is like 4 or 5 words. And even that gets shrunk right. And so it's just about readable. But, a 2, 3 sentence risk warning in that same vein, to make it visible would have to take up the whole screen in that orientation. But that's not the orientation the video was designed for. So there's something in the rules here that hasn't quite been fleshed out yet around what does prominent mean when the mode of the video is being viewed in the context of a format that it wasn't designed for, and of which you've got no control about its presentation in that format. There's no answer. It's just an interesting point to think about, particularly for marketing and design teams. How much are you going to take that into account when you're thinking about the delivery of your promotional material in that way?
And this sort of comes back to something we work hard at, which is to evidence, document, whatever. We do the Loom recordings of the reviews, why we accepted what we did, why we thought it was fine, and to sort of show that, because then you're saying the way we've built this is so that this warning, this disclaimer is prominent, and we've tested it here and we can see that it is prominent. And then when it gets out into the world, you need to obviously monitor that and pick that up and amend it if it's not looking right. But it's very, very difficult, I think, to firstly deal with the different channels and how they present stuff differently in different formats. But then it gets even more difficult when you think about all the different devices. So there will be some people using laptops, PCs with mega big screens, iPhone Pro Maxes, tiny iPhones, Samsungs, Google Pixel. There's every kind of different device out there, all using different media channels that all present things differently, that can all create different outcomes when it comes to what you thought was going to be straightforward, but turns out not to be. And so I guess there's the balance between how the rules cope with that nuance and how firms recognize that it's a thing and make sure that they do everything they can to deal with it. So, like, from our perspective, we use systems that firstly monitor all this stuff so we can see what it looks like, but also mimic or emulate different device types and OS screens and so on, so we can see those different bits and pieces. But there are so many variables, it's difficult to cope with every one for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, a question without an answer, but certainly something to bear in mind, I suppose, particularly for those more like innovative distribution channels that you don't see in OFR world. I don't remember a video for a UCITS fund recently cropping
But
up on the
wouldn't
video feed.
but wouldn't it be good? Like this is why I find it interesting to work on both sides, because you've it's almost like two extremes, right? But I'm pretty sure that there can be a lot of learning across the two. I mean, it would be great to see, as everybody wants, more engagement in the kind of savings and investments that you do through funds. We kind of want to see more of that, and a lot of that requires better, more interesting engagement models, different styles of marketing. And there are one or two that I've spoken to who are interested in doing that, to the OFR piece. So we'll help them with that in terms of the approval of what can be done and what can't be done. But I think what we've learned from the crypto space is there are ways to do things that are effective and compliant. And so let's see if we can get a bit of that into the traditional finance world.
You heard it here first. Wayne wants to do a social media marketing agency front.
Yes, it's going to be amazing. But let's just get the prospectuses approved first.
And so why is some of this important? Well, as we talked about at the top of this episode, we have some news that came out, quite old news now, probably a week and a bit ago, that the FDA had taken enforcement action against an operator of a Bitcoin ATM. Be careful with these 3-letter acronyms. But yeah, so a significant bit of regulatory enforcement criminal action, regulatory fine, and what does that mean? Well, firstly, it means you can't operate a Bitcoin ATM, that's for sure. So let's not be doing that, please. And then the second thing it probably started to show is that we're moving into a new phase of kind of regulatory activity, which started with let's get the rules bedded in, let's correct people, let's make people aware of the rules, let's help people kind of get into a flow with the rules. And now it's okay, you should know by now what the rules are. It's very clear. You've had long enough to implement it. It's a year and a half since these rules came in, a year and 3 months since the full back end frictions came in. We're going to start coming down on now. And so I would expect to see a ramp up in frequency and severity of
And that's
the crypto space.
That's the familiar pattern, though, isn't it? For anyone that's dealt with the regulator for many years, that's how it goes. There's like a new thing comes out. There's some consultation. There's a bedding in period. It's more collaborative correspondence with the regulator when something's new, and then you get the approval, or they move into, like you say, more of a BAU environment. And the temptation is for firms to think, oh, good, that's like, oh, that was hard, wasn't it? But now we're through and we can just crack on and do what we want. And that's kind of a bit of a dangerous place to be. You don't want to become complacent. All of that oversight and that interrogation you were getting, you sort of have to imagine that you're still getting it. It's just that it's not coming from directly anymore. You've got to have that done internally, because the letters may come through less frequently, but when they do land, if they do land because you've done something they don't like, they will be far more forceful and significant than the nudges that perhaps were happening in the bedding in period.
Yeah, exactly. Good. I think that's everything I had this week, Will, unless there's something else we need to cover that I've forgotten about.
That's the main 2 bits.
I'm going to spend the next however long until our next episode finding something that clashes with the sofa just as much as these orange trousers do. So more on that next time.
Yeah, you do need to think that through a bit better, Gareth, because your trousers clash terribly, but your jumper makes you appear like you're just ahead on there.
Indeed. Maybe the sofa is actually demanding, as the interior designer told me.
It's demanding. Yeah. As long as we like it, that's all that matters.
And it's comfortable. So
yeah.
In the next episode, it will be Gareth had a nap. And you can watch that for how long it takes for me to start dribbling.
Yeah. Excellent. Good.
Until next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.